Now for today's business news, and we can go to Jameel Ahmad, Chief Analyst at GTC, who's going to fill us in on what is happening in today's markets. Good morning, Jameel. Global markets overview. We are seeing perhaps a pause in the selling momentum today.
That's exactly right. We're just seeing a pause after what was the worst week of the year for major global markets, such as the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq. In fact, the S&P 500, it was the worst week since March 2023. Over the next couple of days, there's so many key economic data events, starting from, for example, the Chinese economic data that should be due any minute, the Federal Reserve US interest rate decision, the European Central Bank interest rate decision, and specifically when it comes to the Fed, the US Central Bank, everybody's expecting the interest rate cut to be signed, sealed, and delivered. So it might be like having a pin drop in global markets for the next 48 hours or so, where not much happens until we finally get that news and that announcement of the interest rate cut. Well, we're still waiting for real guidance on how big that interest rate cut might be, whether it's 0.25% or 0.5%, which I think is more unlikely. And then the devil will be in the detail for how many more interest rate cuts the US Central Bank might look to do between now and the end of the year. And that's why I think there will be some caution in global assets for the time being.
And there will also be eyes on the US for the Donald Trump-Kamala Harris presidential debate on Tuesday night. How are the markets anticipating that?
Absolutely, you're right. All eyes are going to be very much fixed on a debate that looks to be blockbuster. It comes down to whether the probability swings in one way or direction following this debate, and then that would have implications on financial markets. I think what investors want now is answers over who is the clear candidate, because there's a lot of uncertainty as to who the next president might be, and we're just less than 2 months away from that date now. It comes down to whether Kamala Harris will be able to prove herself as the Democratic candidate and the next president, what that might mean for financial markets and so forth, which is likely to be more of the status quo remaining. Whereas with Donald Trump and the previous presidency of a Make America Great, this time I think it's going to be on an absolute rampage with that narrative and what pro-America policies, growth economic policies that might bring, which would have even larger implications for financial markets. That doesn't mean they're going to be negative implications, but I think that's where the volatility lies.
And as you mentioned, there are a number of key economic data events this week. You mentioned the Fed's interest rates announcement, but there's also going to be Chinese economic data released. What impact is that likely to have on the markets?
A large impact, because at the moment there's anxiety that the Chinese economic growth targets of 5% might not be met based on what has been some weakness in Chinese economic data, specifically over the second half of the year. The first half was quite solid. We knew the Chinese economy was going to be slowing in 2024, but the curiosity is now whether we can meet that 5% growth target. It does appear that exports have grown, but imports have not. Now, the imports signals Chinese economic weakness domestically, but the exports growing at least gives some sort of hope that the global economy still has demand for Chinese goods. And that's been something that we questioned following some of the more recent manufacturing PMI data that have come out from China over recent months. And we also have the UK employment report that's due out in a couple of hours that will show whether the UK Central Bank, the Bank of England, might look to cut interest rates once more this year. At the moment, that door doesn't appear to be fully open, and we need to see whether now something can push open that door.
Thank you very much for that, Jameel Ahmad, Chief Analyst at GTC. It's time now for a look at